They say the day of your husband's funeral is the worst day of your life. They say the grief blinds you, that the tears choke every breath, and that the world becomes a gray and hostile place where you no longer recognize your own reflection. That is what they say. And that is what everyone assumed was happening to me as I stood before the polished mahogany casket in my black lace dress, the veil covering my dry eyes, my hands folded quietly over my abdomen. The murmurs behind me rose and fell like the hum of restless bees. "Poor Margaret," whispered Dorothy, the neighbor from upstairs. "Look at her. She must be in shock. She hasn't shed a single tear. She must be shattered inside. They were the perfect couple. 45 years together. Can you imagine?" And from another voice, one I recognized as the wife of my husband's business partner, Robert was a saint, a hard-working, honest man, always sacrificing himself for her. It's going to be very hard for her to live alone. She always depended on him so completely. I had to bite the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood, just to keep from turning around and screaming, just to keep from letting out the kind of hysterical laughter that would have echoed off the church vault and scandalized every last one of those hypocrites dressed in their mourning black. They were crying for Robert the saint, Robert the impeccable businessman, Robert the devoted husband. But I was not attending that man's funeral. I was standing over the body of a stranger. Worse than that, I was standing over an enemy, a man who had shared my bed, my body, and my soul for 4.5 decades, while every whispered, "I love you," had been a lie, and every "we're doing this for us" had been a fraud. No one in that church knew what I knew. No one knew what made my handbag so heavy that morning. Not the handkerchief, not the rosary, but the mobile phone resting at the bottom of it. A phone that was not mine. A phone I had not known existed until 48 hours earlier. That small rectangle of metal and glass burned through the fabric against my hip like a live coal. To understand why my revenge was silence, I have to tell the story from the beginning. Not from the funeral, from the lie. My name is Margaret. I am 72 years old, and this is my confession of how I died and was reborn in the same week. I met Robert when we were both in our mid-20s. He was charming and ambitious, with a self-assurance that girls like me, quiet, a little timid, filled with literary dreams, found magnetic. I was working as a secretary at a law firm and secretly saving money to enroll in literature courses. He was in sales. On our third date, he looked at me with those dark eyes I believed could read straight into my soul and said, "Margaret, you were made to be taken care of. Let me handle the hard world. You take care of making our world beautiful." It sounded romantic. It sounded protective. I married him convinced I had won some kind of lottery. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, that protection became a velvet cage. First it was my job. "You don't need to work, sweetheart. My salary is more than enough, and I don't want to come home to an empty house. I want to come home to you." And I, in love, left my job. Then came the money. Robert took charge of every account. "You get anxious over numbers for no reason, Isabel. I'll manage things." He gave me a weekly allowance for groceries and household expenses. An allowance that, with each passing year and each wave of inflation, became harder and harder to stretch. For 45 years, I performed miracles with it. I remember standing in the supermarket comparing detergent prices, choosing the generic brand, counting coins to see if I had enough left over to buy a decent piece of ham for him while I ate noodle soup for dinner. "The business isn't doing well," he would tell me in the evenings, brow furrowed over receipts. "We have to tighten our belts. No vacation this year, no new clothes." And I believed him. I believed him because I saw his worn suits, or thought I did. I believed him because he came home late, exhausted, complaining of endless meetings with difficult clients. "I'm doing it for you, Margaret, so you'll always have a roof over your head." I felt guilty. I felt like a burden. Poor Robert, I told myself. He works so hard, and here I am contributing nothing. To compensate, I became the perfect housekeeper. My home was immaculate. His shirts were ironed with starch, not a single wrinkle. His favorite meals were always ready. I gave up my friends because he found them irritating. "They fill your head with nonsense, Margaret." I gave up painting because the smell gave him headaches. I erased myself. I disappeared into the role of Robert's wife. And so the decades passed. Our children grew up and left, relieved to escape the rigidity of their father, leaving me alone with him. I believed we were a team, an austere, serious team, but a loyal one. Until 3 days ago. It was a Tuesday, an ordinary Tuesday. Robert got up, complained that his coffee was too hot, knotted his blue tie, and told me he'd be home late. A dinner with investors from out of town. He kissed me on the forehead, a dry and routine kiss like sealing an envelope, and left. At 3 in the afternoon, the landline rang. "This is County General Hospital calling for Mrs. Margaret." "Yes," I said. "I'm calling about your husband, Robert. He suffered a massive cardiac arrest on the street this afternoon. I'm so sorry, ma'am. There was nothing we could do. He's gone." The world stopped. The sound I made frightened the cat. The taxi to the hospital was a fog of tears and disbelief. He was fine this morning. He had his coffee. When I arrived, trembling, they led me to a cold room, confirmed the news, and handed me some papers. Then a young nurse with a sorrowful face gave me a clear plastic bag. "These are his personal effects," she said softly. "Everything he had on him when it happened." I opened the bag in a mechanical daze. His watch, his worn brown leather wallet, always worn, always the same, his house keys, and a mobile phone. I stared at it. It was a modern smartphone, a recent model, in a black leather case. Robert had a phone, an old flip phone with physical buttons that he claimed was more than enough. He'd always refused to have internet or WhatsApp on it. "That's for foolish young people, Margaret. I don't need those distractions." So whose phone was this? I asked the nurse if she was certain it belonged to my husband. She said it had been in the inside pocket of his jacket. Along with the phone, she handed me one more item, a small silver key. Attached to it was a keychain in the shape of a red heart. Robert despised keychains. He would never carry a red heart. I assumed there had been a mistake. I came home alone, the plastic bag in my lap, the house swallowing me in silence. I sat at the kitchen table and emptied the contents of his wallet, his ID, $50, and a photograph of me from 30 years ago. That made me cry again. He carried me with him, I thought. Poor Robert. Then I picked up the modern phone. The screen lit up and asked for a passcode. I tried his birthday. Wrong. I tried mine. Wrong. Our anniversary. Wrong. Something in my instinct, a voice that had been sleeping for 45 years, whispered to me, "Try something else." The keychain. I turned it over. There was a tiny engraved inscription, LNR 25, L and R, Laura and Robert, or Lucy, day 25. I tried 2525. The phone unlocked. The wallpaper was not a photo of me or our children or a neutral landscape. It was Robert, but not the Robert I knew. This Robert was tanned, laughing with his mouth wide open, wearing a white linen shirt unbuttoned to the chest, holding a cocktail in one hand and wrapping his other arm around a woman's waist. The woman was blonde, elegant, perhaps a decade younger than me, but very well preserved. She wore a turquoise dress and looked at Robert with pure adoration. Behind them, a brilliant blue sea, a paradise beach. I felt the floor open beneath my feet. My hands were shaking so badly, I nearly dropped the phone. I opened the photo gallery. There were thousands, literally thousands. Robert and the blonde woman in Paris. Robert and the blonde woman on a cruise. Robert and the blonde woman celebrating Christmas. The same Christmases he'd told me he had to go check the warehouse inventory. Robert with a brand new car, a red sports car. Robert eating lobster, drinking champagne, dancing. I checked the oldest photos. 2015, 2005, 2000. There were photos going back more than 20 years. 20 years. 20 years in which I had mended his socks. 20 years in which I had eaten leftovers so he could have meat. 20 years in which I hadn't bought myself a winter coat because there was no money. I opened WhatsApp. The contact was saved simply as my life. I read the messages, and each one was a knife. "Just leaving the witch's house, darling. I'll be there in 30 minutes. Have the jacuzzi ready." The old woman believed the story about the business trip to Chicago. "We have the whole weekend free. I bought you those earrings you wanted. I can't wait to retire and stop pretending. But I put up with it because she irons my shirts for free and keeps the house running. She's a decent maid, even if she bores everyone to death." I vomited, literally. I had to run to the kitchen sink and vomit until there was nothing left. The witch, the old maid. That was me. That was how the man to whom I had given my youth, my beauty, and my dreams saw me. But the worst part was not reading it. The worst was hearing it. There was an audio message sent just 2 days earlier. I pressed play and held the phone to my ear, torturing myself with his voice, that deep, authoritative voice I had respected for a lifetime. But the tone was different, light, amused. He said her name, Lucy. He told her not to worry about money. He'd pulled another $3,000 from Margaret's savings account. She never notices. She signs whatever I put in front of her. She's been convinced we've been in crisis since the 90s. She's so naive, poor thing. While she has her soap operas and her kitchen, she's happy. With that money, he said, they were going to the Maldives in October. He promised, I love you. The phone slipped from my hand and hit the table with a sharp crack. The silence that followed was not a silence of grief. It was the silence before an earthquake. I stood. I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand. I walked to the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. I saw an old woman with dark circles under her eyes, gray hair poorly dyed at home to save the cost of a salon. I saw the cheap blouse I was wearing, and then I saw something else. I saw fire. Deep in my pupils, a spark ignited. Ancient, volcanic, pure. Robert had stolen my life. He had stolen my money. He had stolen my dignity. He had made me live in austerity while he lived like a king alongside another woman. And he had called me naive. That word echoed in my head. I spent the next 24 hours in a state of cold frenzy. I did not cry. I did not call anyone yet. I used Robert's phone. I opened his banking application. The passcode had been saved in the phone's notes because he felt completely untouchable. I saw the transfers, monthly payments to an account in Lucy's name, rent on a penthouse apartment in a wealthy part of the city, payments at jewelry stores, 5-star restaurants. And I saw my account, the joint account where I deposited my small pension and where he supposedly contributed his salary. It was nearly empty, just enough to cover the electric and water bills. He had been systematically diverting everything into hidden accounts and spending it on his second life. I found the address that appeared on his Amazon deliveries. I took a taxi. I used the red heart key. The lobby door opened. I rode the elevator to the penthouse. The key opened that door too. The apartment was beautiful, modern, luminous, filled with designer furniture. In the entryway hung a large framed photograph. Robert and the blonde woman toasting with champagne glasses. I went to the wardrobe. There were his clothes. Not the tired old suits he wore at home, but Italian silk suits, designer shoes, expensive watches. In the bedside drawer, I found documents, property deeds in the name of a shell company, life insurance policies with Lucy listed as the sole beneficiary. I sat on that woman's bed. I touched the silk sheets. I thought of my own mended cotton sheets. I thought of the time a tooth ached for weeks and Robert said we had to wait a month because the timing wasn't right. I thought of our children, to whom he always refused financial help, saying they needed to learn the value of hard work, while buying a car for Lucy's daughter. I could have destroyed the apartment, burned his clothes, taken the jewelry, but that would have been the reaction of a hysterical woman, and Robert had always said I was hysterical. No, I was going to be colder than he ever was. I took every financial document I could find, photographed the deeds and the insurance papers, and walked out, leaving the front door wide open. I went home and organized the funeral. I chose the cheapest casket in the catalog. "Are you certain, ma'am?" asked the funeral director. "Your husband was a prominent man, the least expensive," I said, without blinking. He believed in austerity. And so we arrived at that morning, at that church, at that moment with his polished coffin. The priest was finishing his homily, words about Robert's goodness and faithfulness. I scanned the congregation, and then I saw her. She was sitting in the last pew, half hidden behind a column. Lucy. She wore a wide-brimmed black hat, very dramatic. She was crying without restraint, pressing a silk handkerchief to her face. Perhaps she cried for Robert. Perhaps she cried because she had realized the money was gone. Perhaps she had already been to the apartment and found the door standing open. Our eyes met. She saw that I was looking at her. She went still. I held her gaze. I slowly raised my handbag, just enough. I let my fingers rest against it where the phone sat inside. She recognized the gesture. Her eyes opened wide with panic. She understood that I knew everything. The priest cleared his throat. "And now, if the widow would like to say a few words, Margaret, please." A murmur moved through the church. Everyone expected the tearful speech. They expected me to walk up there and speak about what a wonderful man he was, for my voice to crack, for someone to have to hold me up. I stood. My legs were steadier than they had ever been. I walked to the altar. My heels struck the stone floor in the silence. Click, click, click. I climbed the 3 steps to the lectern. I gripped the wood. I looked at the pine casket, that cheap box of unfinished wood, where the man who had defrauded me of my life now lay. I looked at my children in the front row, sad, still ignorant that their father had been something monstrous. I looked at his business partners. And finally, I looked at the blonde woman in the back. I leaned toward the microphone. The electric hum filled the space. I could have said everything. I could have screamed he was an adulterer, a thief. His mistress is sitting right there in the back row. I could have destroyed his reputation in 30 seconds. I could have turned his funeral into a spectacle. Every cell in my body was screaming to do it. The bile burned the back of my throat. But then I remembered his words on the recording. Hysterical, he had called me. A naive fool without class. If I made a scene, if I caused a scandal, he won. I would be the unhinged widow, the bitter woman, and Lucy would become the victim of the chaos. No, the true revenge, the revenge of a woman who knows her own worth, is not the scream. It is contempt. Absolute silence is the greatest insult that exists, because it means the other person does not deserve even your breath, does not deserve your words, does not deserve 1 moment of your energy. So I said nothing. 1 second, 5 seconds, 10 seconds. The silence became uncomfortable, heavy, dense. People began shifting in their pews. She's fainted. She's gone blank. I kept my eyes fixed on the woman in the back, unblinking, with a cold half-smile on my lips. Then I turned and looked at the casket. I allowed a barely perceptible expression of disgust to cross my face, as if I had smelled something rotten. I stepped back from the microphone without having spoken a single syllable. I turned around. I walked down the center aisle, passing my own seat, passing my children, heading for the exit. I did not stop. I walked out of that church into the noon sunlight. I left behind the casket. I left behind the hypocrites. I left behind the terrified mistress. And I left behind Margaret, the obedient wife. When I arrived home alone, I took off the black dress. I went to Robert's wardrobe and pulled out his suits, his shirts, his shoes. I carried everything to the back garden. I piled it up. I poured gasoline over it, the kind we kept for the lawnmower. And I struck a match. As I watched his clothes burn, the black smoke rising into the sky, carrying his smell away with it, I took out Robert's modern phone and typed a message to Lucy. I know who you are. I know where you live. I know about the money. My lawyers will be contacting you tomorrow to recover every cent that was stolen from my assets. If you do not return everything, the photographs of the 2 of you will reach your husband, your children, and your employer. You have 24 hours. Enjoy the morning. Then I threw the phone into the fire. I watched the plastic melt and the screen burst. I sat in the garden chair and watched the flames. My children arrived an hour later, frightened by my exit from the church and the column of smoke. "What are you doing, Mom? Are you all right? Why didn't you speak at the funeral? Why are you burning Dad's clothes? Have you lost your mind?" I looked at them, truly looked at them, for what felt like the first time. Not as children I needed to protect, but as adults who deserve the truth. But not today. "Your father doesn't need clothes where he is," I said calmly. And I said nothing at the funeral because I had nothing good to say. My mother taught me that if you have nothing good to say, it is better to say nothing at all. "But Mom," began my oldest. "Enough," I said quietly. It was a soft command, but there was an authority in it that they had never heard from me before. They fell silent at once. "Today my life begins," I told them. "And in my life, the lies are over. Now go inside and make me a cup of tea. A good tea. A quality tea. And tomorrow morning we are going to the bank together. There is a great deal to sort out." 6 months have passed since that day. I recovered most of the money. The threat worked. Lucy was so terrified of the social scandal that she returned what she could and vanished. I sold the penthouse. With the proceeds, I renovated my home. I threw out all the heavy old furniture Robert had chosen and painted the walls in light, bright colors. I bought myself a new car. not because I drive much, but for the simple pleasure of seeing it in the driveway, and I traveled alone to Paris. I stood in front of the Eiffel Tower and had someone take my photograph. Just me, in a new, elegant coat, smiling, genuinely smiling. Some nights the house feels large. Some nights the ghost of old habit makes my hands reach for a shirt to iron. But then I remember the recording, and I remember the word he used for me, and it passes. Loneliness, I have discovered, is not a punishment. It is a luxury. The luxury of serving no one. The luxury of spending my money on what I choose. The luxury of being the master of my own silence and my own words. I slept beside an enemy for 45 years. It was my mistake. I was blind. But I woke up in time to live my final years, not as a widow, but as a free woman. And if anyone asks me about Robert, I simply smile and say that I hope he rests in peace, because at last I am resting while still alive. If you have ever felt that something in your marriage does not add up, if you have ever felt made small, been called foolish, been told you don't understand numbers, do not wait for the funeral. Look in the pockets, search for the truth, because the truth hurts once, but the lie hurts every single day. Do not be Margaret the obedient. Be Margaret who burns the suits and walks out of the church with her head held high. Your dignity is worth more than any wedding anniversary.